Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody, on this wild, wet, and miserable night. I suppose one of the advantage of lockdown is you can sit in your own home, in your own comfort. Do have a wee glass of something as we rattle through this. So it's just to tell you a little bit about motorcycle law, in particular, motorcycle collisions, compensation, and civil law. So a little bit about me. There I am on my old motorcycle. I've got another one now. I've been a keen motorcyclist for many, many years. Got my license way back when I was, I think, about 18, 20. And then I've been a lawyer for about 33 years now, but my speciality is representing motorcyclists. And I take the view you can only properly represent motorcyclists if you're out there doing it yourself. Because of what I come across day in and day out, I did do my advanced rider training, I think a couple of years ago, basically because I wanted to ensure that I had certain skill sets, because I'm not the best motorcyclist in the world. It doesn't naturally come to me like it does to others. So I think building skill set, having confidence, but also utilizing everything I learned as part of that to represent my clients. You can't do this job unless you can argue the cause of a motorcyclist. You can't argue the cause of a motorcyclist unless you are one. So this evening we will talk about road traffic law. Now it's split into two as far as Scotland is concerned, even UK. So we have criminal law and civil law. So I'm a specialist in civil law. Criminal law is about the Crown, Procurator, Fiscal, Police are involved, and they want to investigate whether there has been a breach of the Road Traffic Act 1988. So that's when you see your section 2s, your section 3s, and it's up to the Crown to establish beyond reasonable doubt that an individual is guilty of a breach of the Road Traffic Act, whether they're careless drivers, and that is, as I say, a criminal matter. Criminal matters will ensure that a driver who knocks you off, who may have been careless, who may have been reckless, who may have been dangerous, is suitably punished, and that is in the public interest. You do not derive any compensation necessarily from that process. However, civil law is a means whereby the injured motorcyclist can recover compensation for their injuries. And the test is much lower. So lawyers like myself, we need to establish, first of all, that there's been a breach of the duty of care. So if you can imagine, when we're all out there interacting with each other on the roads, we all owe each other a duty of care. Often there's a breach of that duty of care, and my job is to establish that drivers may have been negligent, i.e. they have done something or failed to do something as a result of which a motorcyclist has been injured. And we need to establish that on balance of probabilities. So you see, that's a much lower standard than beyond reasonable doubt. And she's much better looking than the criminal guy anyway. So, accidents. Nowadays, if we're absolutely politically correct, we call them collisions, crashes, or incidents. I was brought up on accidents, so I will stick to that. 3 categories. Fault. Simple. The accident, the collision was entirely your own fault. That means you do not recover damages in law. Non-fault, that means that the incident was entirely the fault of the other party. That means you recover full compensation in law. And then there's the one in between. Sometimes both parties have contributed to an incident, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, fingers crossed the technology works. I will show you an example of a fault accident. So have a look carefully at the positioning of, Now, I don't know, it's difficult with the technology, but you can see in that case, the rider was well over those center line road markings when that collision occurred. That means he was the author of his own misfortune and will not recover damages in law. Let's have a look at the opposite of that, which is completely non-fault. This is Morzine in Europe, in case you think he's also on the wrong side of the road. He's touring in Europe with his mate, beautiful day, and you know, he's taking, I think, a left-hand bend. Oh, and you can see for yourself that the vehicle was completely on the wrong side of the road. The motorcyclist had no opportunity to do anything about that. It goes into a bend and that vehicle's there. So that is what we call a non-fault, and that motorcyclist recovered 100% of his compensation. Sometimes, however, it's not quite as simple as that. So here's a filtering instant, and we can discuss it at the end. This is Leith in Edinburgh, busy traffic. And you can see that collision with a filtering motorcyclist. The filtering motorcyclist is going at some speed. He was doing about 25 to 30, filtering past a junction. If you filter past a junction, then more often than not, judges and sheriffs will find the motorcyclist partly to blame. In this case, we were fortunate to get the footage from the driver of the vehicle, and we argued for 100% fault on the driver. And the reason being is if you look very closely at that clip, the entire time the driver is looking left. So regardless of the speed of the motorcyclist, that made no difference because the driver didn't look to his right at all. So the motorcyclist in that filtering case recovered 100% of the damages. Okay. So you've been involved in an accident. One of the first things you need to do or ask your loved ones to do is to report the incident to your insurance company. So we've got a number of them: Bennett's, Hastings, Carroll Nash, MC. We're all insured either comprehensively or third party with an insurer, and you need to report it. That's when things start to go a wee bit awry, and be very careful about the people in the middle that I want to talk about. Fourth dimension. Fourth dimension are there to, more often than not, manage claims on the part of the insurance industry. So who are fourth dimension? They describe themselves as innovation motorcyclist specialist, providing an unparalleled range of services to the insurance industry. You phone up, you might be insured fully comprehensively, you might be insured third party, and you say to your insurer, I've had an accident, I've been injured. Your insurer will say, oh, you need a panel solicitor. Often Fourth Dimension will organize a panel solicitor for you. They'll say, oh, you need a hire motorcycle. Do you? You sign a piece of paper about credit hire, and that's you got responsibility for that. And this is where the system itself is wrong. So Fourth Dimension sit there representing the insurance industry, and so many people get caught up with this. But the worst thing they do is Fourth Dimension also say, you need a panel solicitor. And I discovered this quite recently from one case that I took over from a panel solicitor. And that was Fourth Dimension, in conjunction with a panel solicitor, had signed a motorcyclist app. You might not be able to read that, but this poor motorcyclist had been injured. He contacted his insurer. He was referred to Fourth Dimension, who provide insurance services, management services only, i.e. we'll get your bike repaired, we'll get your hire bike. They referred him to a panel solicitor. And Fourth Dimension, this is what it says. I authorize Fourth Dimension to receive 25% of the damages I receive in respect of my claim. His own personal injury, this company were saying, sign up here, and on settlement, we get 1/4 of your damages. Unbelievable. I have asked for an explanation from the directors of Fourth Dimension. I advised them that I was going to tell you chaps about this evening and ask for comment, and I don't have a comment as yet. I sound a bit like a BBC newsreader, but still, it's quite important. So, some time ago, this chap here, I don't know if you remember him, Jack Straw. He was a Home Secretary at the time, and he discovered a lot of these shenanigans about 20 plus years ago, and he described it as a dirty little secret from the insurance industry, because the insurers get notified of claims, were then selling details to panel solicitors, okay? Getting people to sign up to credit storage, to credit hire, and he described it as the insurance industry's dirty little secret. But what does this result in? I'll tell you what it results in, is an absolute race to the bottom as far as you're concerned. If you've been injured and your insurance company refers you to a panel solicitor, sometimes a middleman will take 25% of your damages. More often than not, that panel solicitor will not necessarily be a motorcyclist. It's a form filling exercise and a process, hence my sausage factory. It's all wrong. It may work for you if you're in your car in Sainsbury's car park and somebody runs into your rear end and you've got a bit of a sore neck. But for us motorcyclists, when we're knocked off our motorcyclists, we get more than a sore neck, and you need a specialist. So I'm very passionate about this, as you can understand. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of panel solicitors, because there's no point in me saying, well, this is what I experienced, without telling you a few stories, and I do like a story. So this is the A82. Some of you may recognize it. It's side of Loch Lomond, and that's the road. So let's have a look at a picture. Okay, so this was the collision. Motorcyclist, you can see for yourself, it's a beautiful sunny day. It was a fella from Northern Ireland, and he'd come across on the ferry that morning, stopped for coffee, and was heading up to Oban. And you can see there, he has collided with the rear of the vehicle in front. You can't argue against that, can you? Look at the extent of the damage. The lady in the picture there was the driver, clearly a bit distressed. So if you look at the image, you think, he's gone into the rear of the vehicle in front. Surely he's responsible. So he was referred to a panel solicitor, and they said, well, yes, you are responsible, Mr. O'Donnell, motorcyclist, and you should accept 80% of the blame here, because the driver says that, you know, she braked. Now you can see it's a long straight section of road. There's no junctions. I can assure you a kangaroo didn't jump out, nor yet did any deer, rabbits, you name it. Lovely clear section of road. Now, this client was unhappy with that, so he came to me, and I said to him, okay, it's all about preparation. I will come to Ireland and I will see you and we'll discuss it in detail. You tell me what happened. That is not a picture of Ireland, that's a picture of Loch Earn, which is a marvellous golf course, because I took the opportunity to play a round of golf when I was over in Ireland. You may as well. However, before hitting the golf course, I did have the best round of golf ever in my life. I met with Leslie O'Donnell and his witnesses all separately, because I can't allow one witness to influence me, and they're not allowed to talk to each other. And Leslie said to me, you know, I just was riding along, and let's have a look at the next slide, please. And you'd get that in somewhere. And there was a long straight section of road, and I was contemplating the overtake. When you're contemplating an overtake, that's the one occasion, you know, when you can breach that 2-second rule, you're moving up, you're thinking about it. And he said it was a straight section of road. I was on for the overtake, and he said, I have honestly never seen anything like it in my life. That driver stopped dead, executed an emergency stop for no apparent reason. Now, the advantage for me was that the rider behind Leslie, and one of 3 in his party, was quite a senior officer in the police service of Northern Ireland. And his responsibility was to organise Bike Safe. And I thought, well, he'll make quite a good witness. I'll have a wee chat with him. And he was equally as sure that this driver, for no apparent reason, stopped dead. So here I am with a case. Panel solicitor says 80-20. You've run into the rear of somebody. And I think, no, Leslie, I think you've got a perfectly good case. So I raised it in court, had an advocate as well, working as part of a team, because I'm a good solicitor, and sometimes advocates are very good like actors. They're good in court. And I knew what my witnesses would say because I was very well prepared, but you never get to know what the defender will say because you can't speak to them. And this young woman you can see there in the blue dress got into court and into the witness box and swore the oath and did all of that. And we allowed the other side, because their witness, defender's witness, to take her evidence in chief. And she said during the course of our evidence, she said, I saw lights behind me. I knew there were motorcyclists. So I panicked and I braked. And I braked so heavily that the vehicle stalled. She took her foot off the accelerator, rammed it on the brake, and came to an emergency stop. So the result? Sheriff Kenny McGowan, who'd never found for a pursuer, decides that the motorcyclist is not to blame at all. So there you have an example of running into the rear of somebody in front. Panel solicitor saying it's 80-20. And when it comes to somebody, or a firm like ourselves, because there's a number of us, all motorcyclists, we're very passionate about what we do. We got a good result for the client, 100% of his damages. So he was a very happy man. So that's liability. That's how accidents happen. But sometimes liability can be admitted and a panel solicitor might still get it wrong. So here's the home run, as I call it. And have a look what happened to this poor chap. He's about 500 meters from home. Oh, he's on his own side of the road. That car cuts the corner. And they do say a number of collisions, do occur within a 5-mile radius of your own home. And he phoned up his insurers. He said, I've been involved in a collision. He said, oh, well, you'll need a panel solicitor. So he was sent off to the same panel solicitor, by the way. Liability admitted, because the driver's insurance company, it was a hands up. We're not going to argue how this accident happened. We're just going to pay out. But what does just going to pay out mean? Let's have a look. So a statement of valuation of claim is something we do as lawyers day in and day out. So you have compensation, you might see up there. This motorcyclist has what's called an avulsion fracture of his right ankle, and that's often where there's been a pulling of the ligament and it'll take a bit of bone with it. And the panel solicitors thought that was worth £3,500 to £4,000. Our valuation was 15. Wage loss, the panel solicitor claimed £400 because the client says, yeah, I think I've lost about £400 in wages. But actually the wage loss calculation was 1,182 because we recovered all the wage slips. Interestingly, he was also obliged to refund to his employers the sick pay he was paid during his absence, 2,530. If that had not been claimed and the employer found out, the employer claims it off the client. Services often miss the sort of help that you need, £500. And this chap was psychologically traumatized, so we also added in something that I'm very keen on. We use Roddy Benzes, who's you may have heard about. He's former police motorcyclist. After a collision, you can find yourself a bit twitched. You're not as confident as you used to be. You're always looking at that junction. And to ride a motorcycle well takes confidence. And you need to be relaxed. If you're not relaxed, that tension makes its way through to the handlebars. So we claimed for 6 sessions of advanced rider training, confidence building training, because a lot of us, do get a bit twitched after a collision, and it's important to, we will factor in advanced rider training. So this chap, albeit he got back to work, because he had an injury to his foot, he couldn't do any overtime, and that had been ignored. So the panel solicitor told him to accept £4,000 to £5,000. We valued the claim and secured a settlement at £22,250. That is the difference. When you deal with paper and forms, you can get low valuations. We get to know the individual. It's vastly important, and we're very passionate about what we do. So if we have a wee look now, as I say, we have common motorcycle collisions, junctions, and we keep saying, please, please, please watch out for junctions. This example here came from, an advanced rider, and you can sometimes tell in many respects. I would imagine, like most experienced riders, when you're approaching a junction, you're looking for eye contact, you're looking for movement. And that's exactly what he did. He avoided it because he could see it coming. And in many respects, that's what we're always saying to our motorcyclists is we're vulnerable. We need to, I remember a chap, his name was John McDonald, and he runs the motorcycle training school up in Fife. I think he was a 6-time Scottish champion, and he once turned around and said, I said, can you give me a tip for motorcyclists? He said, yeah, give way to anything bigger than you, whether they've got right of way or not. And I think that's very sensible. Other examples, and this can happen, that was a rural environment, urban environment, a lot going on. So you can see it's very, very difficult. You get split seconds to make decisions. He couldn't see that car coming, and he was off. He was okay. He fractured his wrist, but very, very experienced rider. Look at his clothing, the white helmet, the fluorescent, and the driver still doesn't see. And as I say, I think junctions can be, watch this, no contact. The motorcyclist was sure he was going to collide with that van, so laid the bike down. We still recovered full damages for him, because you can't argue there was no collision. What the motorcyclist did in that situation was to avoid, more serious injury by laying the bike down. Roundabouts are another area for us, so we'll have a quick look at this. Nighttime particularly, and you wouldn't want to have a tussle with this big boy straight out in front of the rider. Again, he was okay. I wouldn't show you any of these incidents without the approval of the clients, and thankfully, minor to moderate injuries. So I just want to mention this in passing. I'm being my bonnet about tractors, okay? And they're problematic. They're problematic for a host of reasons, let alone their muck off great big size. Okay, you collide with that and you will come off worse. There's just 2 cases I mentioned. I'm not going to describe them this evening because I wanted this evening to be a quick run through. But Goad v butcher, the motorcyclist was unsuccessful in recovering damages, and that's because he was doing 55 to 60 in a 40-mile-an-hour limit, and he was coming round a bend, and the tractor was coming out of a junction and cut the corner. Judges actually quite like the rural community sometimes and these tractor drivers. Lambert, it was his wife who raised the action because Lambert lost his life in the collision. He was coming over a blind summit on a country road doing 80. And as he came over the summit, there was a tractor driver turning right into a farm entrance. And he didn't recover anything in damages. However, all doom and gloom, and we are getting a little bit of help from the judges, which may sound a little bit unusual. This case from not very long ago, Hernandez v. Acar. Hernandez, a motorcyclist, horribly injured, paraplegic. He was riding on Victoria Park Road. This is an English decision, 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, and he was doing, I think, about 50, could have been 55. A BMW driver pulled out of this junction here and into his path. BMW driver said, I looked, there was no one there, I pulled out, and the motorcyclist was speeding. Now, in a case like that, you would think, can the motorcyclist recover damages in law? Well, the sight lines were pretty good for the driver, but it's very difficult to judge speed. He assumed he could see. And the court said in that case, actually, the driver is 60% responsible, and you had to look at causative potency. Number one, how the accident occurred, and number two, who's the most vulnerable. So in a situation like that, the causal factor is the BMW driver pulling out, and he's got the ability to cause more harm to the motorcyclist. So that was a very positive decision for the English courts, looking at our vulnerability. So I wouldn't leave an evening without talking about road surface defects in my hall of shame. And I must say the roads are appalling at the moment. You know, you're going to have a Vicar Dibley moment shortly where you'll just disappear into that pothole altogether, bike and all. So let's have a wee look. The first case was an unsuccessful case. I'm not going to say that we win them all. I remember once this judge actually in this case, Lord Pentland, and I used to use him when he was junior counsel and senior counsel. We lost touch because he gave up doing personal injury work and went on to commercial work, as you do when you want to become a judge. And I bumped into him about, I don't know, 15 years ago, and he said, oh, Brenda, how's it going? And I said, oh, it's great, I haven't lost a case yet. He said, you're not doing your job properly. We don't cherry pick, we fight cases, and we take them on if we think we've got a 50% prospect of success. And Mr. Peter Dure was riding up, this is the Borders, quite near Tweedsmuir. Couldn't remember a thing about what happened to him, but he came round this bend here and he tracked into that defect. That's what's called edge deterioration, and he couldn't get out of it. And we raised an action against Scottish Borders Council. The reason being our police officers were brilliant. Two of the reporting officers, they were just fantastic. They said it was horrendous. I thought that was quite good. The local authority said that's not edge deterioration, this is edge deterioration. So regardless, we pushed on, and two of the reporting officers gave evidence, vastly experienced. And Lord Pentland, my age-old pal, decided that the local authority had not breached their duty of reasonable care and described the police officers as partisan and advocates for the pursuer. Very disappointing. He stitched us up in credibility, no award of damages. There are other problems. Jet patching, absolute nightmare. This is a wee chap from Elgin, and I always like good story, you know, because he wasn't too badly injured, but he did bring a smile to my face because he was from Elgin And he said to his wife this morning, he said, look, I'm just going out on a wee running on the motorcycle. She said, well, I'll be back by 5. So off he went, beautiful day. And he got back at 4:45. So he had 15 minutes left to curfew. So he thought, I'll just do a wee route up round by the golf course. If only he hadn't done it, but he wanted the extra 15 minutes in. And as he was approaching this road, there was one sign there that said loose chippings, one sign. And he proceeded into that bend and lost it on extensive gravel. Now, jet patching is pretty horrific. It's a means whereby, as you know, they get these big machines up and they jet and they blow out all the debris, and then they put it in, they pack it, and they scatter it with loose stones as well. And this stuff remains on the road. It can get blown off, dispersed by vehicles. But our expert civil engineer, jet patching is as hazardous to motorcyclists as resurfacing. Therefore, you need to have the extensive signage in place in accordance with what we call Chapter 8 of the Traffic Signs Manual. So Murray Council refused to award our client any damages, saying actually there was more signs than that. We complied with the signage and fought it tooth and nail. Before going to court, we're always entitled to get a list of witnesses from the defenders, i.e. who they're going to rely on. So they had a list of, I think about 5 or 6 council workers. So we said, we want facilities to go and take statements from them. And so my colleague up north in Aberdeen, Ros, went off, packed her bags in the day when you could drive to see people. She sat down with all these council workers, only to discover that their own solicitors hadn't taken statements from them. And they're all, hey, Jimmy, did you put the sign up? No, I think it was you, Billy. No, I didn't. So we discovered that they hadn't had a proper system, and we secured damages for our client. But jet patching is a problem. Other things that you might not be so familiar with, you might see this on the road, is what's called fattening up or fatting up. And that's when, you know, they're laying a road surface. And what happens is sometimes if they do this when it's wet, you get the bitumen bubbling up the surface, as you can see here. Local authorities are obliged to inspect the roads, and this road surface had been like that for about 18 months or so. Regular inspections, the roads inspector had noticed this fatting up, but didn't think it was a hazard to road users. Not if you're in a car, not if you're in a lorry. 2 wheels going into that. If you imagine going into a bend, the contact patch with your tires is about the size of the palm of your hand. And as he went into it, the rear wheel lost traction and kind of came round to meet him, came off. We raised that and were successful, because the duty of care for local authorities is to all road users. And again, unless you're a motorcyclist, you wouldn't necessarily know the dynamics about motorcycle control, about contact patches and what happens. Reinstatement. You would have seen this, you know, when the utilities companies go and they dig things up and they put in these wee trenches. 11 foot, motorcyclist, he fractured his arm, again, a successful case. But the thing I wanted to highlight, as a motorcyclist, if you imagine you're going into that corner, it's a long straight, you're doing it about 60. You're slowing down for that left-hand bend, as you can see. You imagine how quickly you approach it. Look at that. Now, let's go back one if we can. So what does it look like? It looks fairly innocuous. You get a bit closer, wallop. Where are you? It's too late to do anything in particular about it. It's roughly right on your line. And look even further, you can see that depth. And he came off. Again, it was a successful claim, because that is horrendous, to use the words of my police officer. And again, significant problems. Car, it doesn't matter, because 2 wheels are out here and 2 wheels are out here. Motorcyclist, big, big problem. So, last week's story, Jimmy Miller. Now, Jimmy Miller made his way up to Glencoe. A number of us would have been up there, and it's a beautiful run up. You get up to Ballyhullish, you can go either way, background. And I would imagine most of you have been at the Green Welly and made your way back home, and you might recognise the Lickstall garage. Jimmy was coming down there this particular day, beautiful, beautiful day. See the driver of that wee Honda? She was arguing with her husband, saying, we need to pull in. He said, no, don't, keep going. She was so busy arguing with him that she pulled right across into the garage, and that's Jimmy. The female rider there that you can see in the picture, she was a Dutch tourist, and she turned around and she said to the driver, do you think you're blind or what? But Jimmy was very, very seriously injured, and a helicopter had to take him to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Horrific injuries. And this is where it really is important to have somebody on your side. Jimmy was spent 31 days in hospital, Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and most of those were in the high dependency unit. So when I saw him, he'd managed to get home. He'd been an HGV driver. And that's when I said to the third party insurer, we need rehabilitation. So we appointed what's known as a case manager. A case manager is a nurse or occupational therapist. And we work with them to fix the motorcyclist. Okay, I can't do that as a lawyer. We need professional help. And we got Jimmy physiotherapy, private orthotics. He'd had a cardiac arrest at the scene of the accident and also in the hospital. And as he always said, he died twice. So we got him reference to, healthy hearts. Made sure the garden was all landscape because he couldn't do his gardening anymore. He couldn't get back to work. And so for us, there was about 5 medical consultants, vocational experts. Salation is a weird word that we use for compensation for pain and suffering. So he had past wage loss, he'd future wage loss, pension loss, services. He needed professional care. We looked at equipment around the house, things that he could do. Transport as well, because for a long time he couldn't drive and his wife didn't drive at all. We looked at adapting his property. As I say, his back garden was like the Himalayas. So we had that all leveled out. And even the cost of holidays, there's an increased cost when you're left with a disability. Now, at the end of this case, the insurer, we did not need to raise it in court. Myself and a very forward-thinking insurer got him the help he needed to get him back on his feet. And ultimately, we agreed to a very, very significant award in damages. And that avoided the stress of litigation. As a litigator, we might say it's all about raising proceedings in court. It's not. It's about getting the right result for your client. And so we donated, some of our fee to the Scottish charity Air Ambulance that had rescued Jimmy that day, and actually for the first time had a doctor on board. And that's Jimmy and me at a wee dance to raise funds for SCA later on. So top tips for y'all, and we'll just finish off. Don't take out legal expense insurance. Most important. When you're taking out insurance, you don't need that. That means you'll get referred to a panel solicitor and your insurer just puts money in its back pocket. Number 2, if you're involved in an accident, incident, collision, ask the police for the registration number of the vehicle that hit you. You're entitled to it. If you're too injured to get it, see if a mate can get it for you. Ask them for that. Number 3, don't ever allow your insurer to appoint a panel solicitor. You can come straight to us and we look after you. Number 4, this happens. This is my Hastings v. Hastings. The third party insurer, they get in touch with you direct and say, oh, we're terribly sorry, but we'll pay out. How can they possibly pay you a sum of damages when they've got responsibility? Where's the incentive to make sure you get what you're entitled to? So we have none of that. And as I say, appoint your own specialist solicitor, because I do think that the personal service matters. And we've got a number of motorcyclists in the firm. It's not just me, thankfully, because I'm getting a bit elderly now. We've got, as I say, highly qualified, really enthusiastic young motorcycling lawyers, all as passionate as I am. So everyone's an individual. It's not part of a process. It never will be for us. And I think, oh, I just put this in at the end. If you can't sleep at night and you're looking for a read that will make you go to sleep at night, The Secret Barrister, it's actually stories about the law and how it's broken, because I take the view that the law is broken if it's all about insurers appointing panel solicitors and money exchanging hands. That's not what the law is about. Everybody in my firm looking after motorcyclists are fully qualified lawyers, and they are passionate about what they do. So for us, the law is not broken. So if you have any questions, you can all unmute, ask me any questions. If you want to say we've had quite enough of you and we're going to get on with our beers, that's fine too. So I'll open it up, and thank you for listening.